You married me for my money, and now you're back for more. Julian pointed at his ex-wife as his family watched. Then he ordered security to throw her out. Wren stood there, humiliated, while the same man who once called her his greatest support accused her of being a gold digger. She could have exposed him. Instead, she picked up her folder, looked him straight in the eyes, and quietly said, "You're making a very expensive mistake." Julian laughed. He thought he had just thrown a desperate woman out of his family's estate. He didn't know she had come carrying something his family had been desperately searching for. Why was Wren really there? What was hidden inside that folder? And why had the people trying to save Julian's fortune been waiting for her? The heavy wooden doors of the Bowmont estate shut behind Wren. For a few seconds, she simply stood on the stone steps. She did not cry. She did not turn around. She only held the brown leather folder against her chest and took one slow breath. Behind those doors was a family that had once treated her like one of their own. Now, they had watched her being thrown out. And the man who ordered it was the man she had once loved. Wren Halstead was 36 years old, tall, calm, and quietly confident. She wore a simple cream jacket over a dark dress. Nothing about her clothes screamed wealth. That was exactly how she wanted it. Most people who saw Wren for the first time would never guess that she had spent the last 7 years building one of the most successful private property investment firms in the country. She had started with one small investment. Then another. Then another. She bought old properties that other investors considered too risky, repaired them, improved their value, and sold or refinanced them carefully. She never chased attention. She never put her face on magazine covers. And she never told Julian how much her investments had grown. That decision had begun during their marriage. 3 years earlier, Wren had sat across from Julian at their kitchen table. He had been angry because she had questioned one of his business decisions. "You don't understand how serious business is," he had told her. Wren had looked at him quietly. "I understand more than you think." He had laughed. "You studied property management. You didn't build a fortune." Those words had stayed with her. Not because they were cruel. Because they showed her something she had been afraid to admit. Julian did not respect what he could not see. And Wren had slowly begun to understand that if he knew how much money she was making, he might start seeing her as an investment instead of his wife. So she kept her financial life private. Eventually, their marriage broke. There was no single explosion. It was a long chain of small wounds. Arguments, pride, broken promises, and one terrible night when Julian accused her of staying with him because of his family's money. Wren had stared at him for a long time. Then she removed her wedding ring. She placed it on the table. "I hope one day you understand what you just said." He never did. Until today. Across the estate, Julian Beaumont was still standing inside the private dining room. At 39, Julian had everything most people dreamed of. A luxury home overlooking the water. Several expensive cars. A family name that opened doors. And control of Bowmont Heritage Properties, a company that owned historic hotels, private estates, and luxury vacation properties along the Georgia coast. But the image of wealth was beginning to crack. Julian's company was struggling. A major restoration project had gone far over budget. 2 hotels were carrying heavy debt. And a new resort project had swallowed millions more than expected. The family needed fresh money. A lot of it. Nearly $180 million. For months, Julian had met investors. Every meeting ended the same way. Questions. Doubt. Requests for financial records. Then silence. Until one private investment group showed interest. They had agreed to meet Julian at the Bowmont estate. But they had made one strange request. They wanted Wren Halstead present. Julian had refused. He had been certain the investors would eventually understand. Then Wren walked into the room. And his pride took control. Now he stood beside the long dining table, still angry. His younger cousin, Coralie Finch, watched him carefully. Coralie was 34 and had always been different from the rest of the Bowmont family. She cared less about appearances. She noticed things. And she had noticed the way Wren had looked at Julian before leaving. There had been no hatred in her eyes. That bothered Coralie more than anger would have. "Julian," she said softly, "you shouldn't have done that." Julian turned toward her. "Don't start." She was invited. "I don't care." "You should." Julian gave a bitter laugh. "She left me. She walked away from this family. Now that the business is struggling, suddenly she wants a seat at the table." Coralie shook her head. "You don't know why she came." "I know exactly why." But even as he said it, Julian's eyes moved toward the closed doors. For one brief moment, he remembered Wren as she had been years ago. She had stood beside him during his first major property deal. He had been nervous. She had noticed his shaking hands and quietly placed her hand over his. "You'll be fine," she had whispered. He had smiled. Back then, Julian had believed she was the one person who would always stand beside him. He did not know that the woman he had just thrown out had once saved one of his biggest deals without taking credit for it. And he certainly did not know that she had come today carrying information that could change the future of his family. At the far end of the room, an older man named Silas Bowmont quietly closed a folder. Silas was Julian's uncle. For decades, he had helped manage the family's properties. He was careful, respected, and rarely emotional. But when he heard that Wren had been removed from the meeting, his face tightened. He looked toward Julian. "You may have just made the worst decision of your life." Julian frowned. "What does that mean?" Silas did not answer. Because he knew something Julian did not. The investment group was not simply looking at Bowmont heritage properties. They were waiting for Wren. And outside the estate, Wren was already opening the leather folder. Inside was a financial report, an old photograph, and a document bearing a signature Julian had not seen in years. His mother's. Wren looked at the signature for several seconds. Then she closed the folder. Her face remained calm. But deep inside, an old promise was coming back to life. A promise she had made before Julian's mother died. A promise that could force the Bowmont family to face a truth they had buried for years. And this time, Wren was not going to protect them from the consequences. Wren remained inside her car for several minutes, staring at the old photograph inside the folder. It showed Julian's mother, Morde Bowmont, standing beside the unfinished entrance of one of the family's first hotels. Wren remembered that day. She had been married to Julian for only 8 months. Morde had invited her to lunch, away from the rest of the family. At first, Wren thought it was simply a family lunch. It wasn't. Morde had placed several papers on the table. "I need someone I can trust," she had said. Wren had looked at her carefully. "Why me?" "Because you listen before you speak." Those words had stayed with Wren. Morde had explained that some of the Bowmont properties were losing money, but the family records did not show the full picture. She suspected someone was moving money between properties to hide the losses. She had not accused anyone. She wanted proof first. Wren had agreed to quietly look into it. But before she could finish, Morde became seriously ill. 3 weeks later, she died. The investigation was never completed. Or at least, that was what Julian believed. Wren slowly returned to the present. She looked at the folder again. There was one more reason she had come to the Bowmont estate. She had received a letter from the private investment group 3 weeks earlier. They wanted to finance Bowmont heritage properties. But they had found something troubling during their review. The company's records did not match several old property documents. Someone had been hiding losses for years. And the investors had one condition. They wanted Wren involved in the review. They knew her firm had previously invested in several properties connected to the Bowmont family. They also knew something Julian did not. Wren's company was large enough to provide the financing itself. But she had not agreed to do that yet. She wanted to understand the truth first. Inside the estate, Julian was becoming impatient. "Why are they taking so long?" he asked. Coralie glanced toward the door. "Maybe because you threw out the person they came to see." Julian's face hardened. "Stop defending her." "I'm not defending her." Then what are you doing? Trying to stop you from making another mistake. Julian stepped closer. What do you know? Coralie hesitated. She had promised Morde years ago that she would not speak about certain family matters unless the situation became dangerous. Now it had. Your mother trusted Wren, Coralie finally said. Julian went still. My mother? Yes. Before he could ask another question, Silas entered the room. We have a problem. Julian turned. What? The investors changed the meeting. When? Tomorrow morning. Julian frowned. Why? Silas looked directly at him. They want Wren present. Silence filled the room. Julian gave a short laugh. Absolutely not. Silas did not move. Then there will be no deal. Julian's smile disappeared. For the first time, fear entered his eyes. Outside, Wren received a message. The investors have confirmed. Tomorrow. 9 o'clock. She stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. Bring the original Bowmont documents. Wren slowly looked back at the estate. She knew what those documents could do. They could expose the truth. But they could also destroy people who had nothing to do with the deception. She closed her eyes. Then she remembered Julian's words. You married me for my money. Her hurt had not disappeared. But neither had her promise to Morde. Wren started the car. Tomorrow, she would return. And this time, Julian would have no security guard powerful enough to remove her from the room. The next morning, Julian arrived at the estate before 8. He had barely slept. The thought of losing the investment had followed him through the night. Without the money, the resort project could collapse. If that happened, the family would have to sell several properties. He blamed Wren. He refused to consider that he might have caused the problem himself. At 8:55, a black sedan stopped outside the estate. Wren stepped out. This time, no one stopped her. She walked through the front doors carrying the same leather folder. Julian was waiting in the hall. You came back. Wren looked at him. I was invited. You enjoyed embarrassing me yesterday. No. Then why are you doing this? Wren held his gaze. Because your family needs the truth more than it needs another lie. Julian's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, the investors entered. The meeting began in silence. Wren sat at the far end of the table. Julian started his presentation. For 20 minutes, everything looked perfect. The numbers were clean. The properties appeared profitable. The resort looked like a safe investment. Then Wren opened her folder. I have a question. Julian sighed. What now? She placed one document on the table. This property was listed as debt-free. Julian nodded. Yes. Wren placed another document beside it. It wasn't. Julian stared at the papers. Silas suddenly looked away. Coralie noticed. Uncle Silas. Silas said nothing. Wren continued. This property had a private loan attached to it 6 years ago. The loan was moved through 3 different family accounts. Julian looked at Silas. What is she talking about? Silas finally spoke. I was trying to protect the family. Julian stood. From what? Silas looked at him. From you. The room went silent. Julian's face changed. Silas explained that 6 years earlier, Julian had made a major mistake on a hotel project. He had borrowed money without telling his father because he was desperate to prove he could handle the business. When the project failed, Silas discovered the debt. Instead of exposing Julian, he moved money from other properties to cover it. He thought he was protecting his nephew. But the hidden debt grew. Every attempt to hide the first mistake created another. Wren listened without interrupting. Then she placed one final document on the table. This is the part nobody told you. Julian looked down. It was a letter from Morde. His mother's handwriting. He picked it up with trembling hands. The letter explained that Morde had discovered the financial problem before her death. She had also discovered that Wren had been quietly investigating it. Morde had trusted Wren because Wren was willing to tell the truth even when the truth hurt. Julian looked at Wren. You knew. I knew something was wrong. You knew about the debt. Not all of it. Then why didn't you tell me? Wren's voice remained calm. Because every time I tried to warn you, you believed I was attacking you. Julian lowered his eyes. The investors were silent. Then their lead representative spoke. We can still finance the company. Julian looked up. Hope flashed across his face. But there is one condition. He waited. Julian cannot control the restructuring alone. The room became still. For the first time, Julian understood what Wren had been doing. She had not returned to beg for money. She had returned because she was one of the people capable of deciding whether his family received it. And the cruelest part was that she still had not revealed the full extent of her power. She simply closed her folder. I have one more document. Julian stared at her. What is it? Wren looked at him. The document that decides whether I save your family. Then she placed her hand on the folder. And refused to open it. Wren kept her hand on the folder. Julian stared at her, waiting. What is that document? Wren looked around the table before answering. It is not a document that gives me control of your family. Julian frowned. Then what is it? It is the restructuring agreement. She opened the folder and placed the papers in front of him. The investors will provide the money your family needs, but there are conditions. The hidden debts must be fully reported. An independent accountant will review every property. Silas must step away from financial control. And you must accept responsibility for the decisions that created the first debt. Julian's face tightened. You want me to admit I caused this? I want you to stop pretending you didn't. The words landed harder than any insult. Julian looked at the papers again. For years, he had blamed the economy, his employees, his uncle, and even Wren. But now he could see the chain clearly. One bad decision. One secret. One attempt to hide it. Then another. Then years of moving money around until the family business became trapped beneath debts nobody wanted to discuss. Silas quietly lowered his head. I should have told you years ago, he said. Julian looked at him. You should have. Silas nodded. I was afraid your father would destroy you. Julian's voice became softer. And instead, you helped destroy the business. Silas had no answer. The investors gave Julian until the following afternoon to sign. For the first time in years, Julian had to choose between protecting his pride and protecting the people who depended on the family business. He signed. The following months were painful. 3 properties were sold. Several expensive plans were cancelled. The family's lifestyle became smaller. But the employees kept their jobs, and the company slowly became stable again. Silas resigned from financial management and accepted legal responsibility for the false records. Julian also began changing. Not overnight. He still became angry. He still made mistakes. But he stopped blaming everyone whenever something went wrong. One afternoon, months after the meeting, Julian found Wren outside one of her renovated properties. He approached her alone. I owe you an apology. Wren looked at him. For yesterday. For much more than yesterday. He took a breath. I called you a gold digger. Yes. I told security to throw you out. Yes. I believed you wanted my family's money. Wren said nothing. Julian looked down. I was wrong. Wren accepted his apology with a quiet nod. But she did not ask him to come back. Their marriage had ended for reasons deeper than money. Julian finally understood that. Before leaving, he asked one question. Did you ever hate me? Wren thought about it. No. I hated the person we became together. Julian nodded slowly. Then he walked away. Wren watched him disappear down the road before turning back toward the property she had built herself. She had saved the Bowmont business. But that was not her greatest victory. Her greatest victory was learning that she could help someone without needing them to love her, praise her, or choose her again. Morals of the story. Never judge someone by appearances. Wren looked simple, but Julian had no idea what she had built. Pride can make people blind. Julian was so convinced Wren wanted his money that he failed to see the truth in front of him. Small lies can become enormous problems. Silas tried to hide one mistake, and years of secrecy turned it into a much bigger crisis. Protecting someone from the truth is not always kindness. Silas believed he was protecting Julian, but his silence made the situation worse. Forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. Wren accepted Julian's apology without returning to the marriage. Real strength is not always revenge. Wren had the power to destroy Julian's family, but she chose accountability instead. Money cannot repair broken trust. Julian's family had wealth, property, and influence, but none of those things could restore what was lost between him and Wren. Your actions eventually have consequences. Julian's pride and Silas's secrecy created problems that could no longer be hidden. The greatest victory can be personal growth. Wren's final victory was not becoming richer or more powerful. It was becoming free from the need for Julian's approval.